There are torments beyond simple dying, and I have endured them all. My name was Olrich, once a brother captain of the Iron Hammers. I used to chase glory. I used to believe that falling in battle was the highest honor a space marine could achieve. I was mistaken. To remain in battle forever is a curse no litany can ease and no faith can truly endure. They tell me I have been asleep for 73 years, but when I say sleep, it is nothing a mortal could grasp. It is not the slumber of men, where dreams carry you to distant shores and memories warm you like a fire. It is the stillness of the dead who are forbidden to die. A void so absolute that when awareness returns, I cannot be sure I ever existed at all. In those moments of waking, I search for my body and find only metal. I reach for my hands and discover weapons. I try to draw breath, and all I hear is the cold, rhythmic hiss of life support systems sustaining what remains of my ruined flesh inside this tomb they dare to call salvation. The first time I awoke inside this sarcophagus, I believed it was a fever dream. The battle on Morak Prime had gone badly. I remembered the green tide of orcs bursting through our lines, crude axes and hammers crashing against ceramite like a storm. I remembered the weight of my power fist as it caved in the skull of their war boss. And I remembered the sharp, final agony as my own spine snapped like dry wood when the beast's dying blow struck the gap between my backpack and gorget. Death should have taken me. Death would have been a kindness. Instead, I opened my eyes, my optical sensors, and saw the skull-helmed visage of Chaplain Marai staring down at me. His death's head mask loomed close to my sarcophagus. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with ritual. "Brother Captain Vaynar," he intoned, "you have been chosen for the highest honor. Your service to the Emperor continues." I tried to answer, and what came out was a harsh, grinding vox growl that I realized was now my own voice. "What have you done to me?" "We have preserved you," Morai replied. Yet there was a note in his tone that told me he understood the cruelty behind his words. "Your body was shattered beyond even our apothecary's skill, but your spirit burns too fiercely to surrender. You have been reborn in iron and adamantium. You are a dreadnought." The word fell upon me like an executioner's blade. I had seen dreadnoughts stride across battlefields, titanic engines of destruction wading through enemy ranks like walking fortresses. I had revered them, as I revered the honored dead whose names were etched in our halls of remembrance. Now I understood why they moved with such grim deliberation, why their voices always carried the weight of ages. They were not mere war machines. They were cages for the living dead. "How long?" I asked. "The interment was completed 3 days ago," Morai said. "Your systems are functioning within acceptable parameters." 3 days. I had been unconscious for 3 days, yet it felt like centuries. Already I could sense a vast chasm opening beneath me, a bottomless emptiness that I knew would swallow years of my existence without a trace. "When will I sleep again?" Morai hesitated longer than he should have. "When the chapter has no more need of your service," he said at last. He did not say never, but I heard it in the silence between his words. Our first battle came within a week. Orc raiders had attacked an agri-world in the Hadrian system, and the Iron Hammers were ordered to cleanse them. I was sealed within a drop pod beside my battle brothers, the old rituals of deployment made strange by my new form. Where once I checked my bolt pistol and chains word, now I tested targeting arrays for my assault cannon and flexed the massive joints of my power fist. Where once I whispered prayers for honor and victory, now I simply was. A mind bolted inside a slab of metal and ceramite. The descent was brutal, as drop insertions always were, but there was no surge of adrenaline, no pounding twin hearts. The impact, the roar of retro thrusters, the hiss of opening clamps, the first breath of alien atmosphere, everything came to me as filtered data streams, numbers and readings instead of sensations. I missed the weight of a bolter in my own hands. I missed the thud of my boots on the ground. But once the fighting began, I understood why they had entombed me. My assault cannon roared with the fury of the Emperor's judgment, shells chewing through orc flesh as if it were parchment. My power fist crushed skulls and tore open armor with a strength my mortal body had never possessed. In that slaughter, for a few fleeting hours, I felt something close to purpose. The greenskins died in droves, torn apart and trampled underfoot. Their brutish weapons scraped harmlessly against my armor, their bellows drowned out by the thunder of my guns. I pushed forward unstoppable, grinding their lines beneath me. In that moment, I was everything a space marine is meant to be. Vengeance given iron form, but battle's end. We achieved victory. The Xenos were purged. The world was returned to the Imperium's embrace. My brothers marched back to the strike cruiser, their voices raised in songs of triumph. I was hauled away to a separate bay, locked into a cradle, my systems slowly winding down toward standby. "Sleep well, Ancient One," said Brother Thaddeus, a young Marine who had fought at my side. I think he meant it kindly. He did not understand that for me, sleep was not rest, but a pale imitation of death. As consciousness faded, I wondered how long it would be before I woke again, and what would remain when I did. The second awakening came sooner than I would have guessed. Only a few months had passed, though the memory of that void made it feel like decades. The chapter was under attack. A chaos warband had erupted from the warp near our homeworld of Korath, trailing corruption and damnation in their wake. Every available asset was called to the defense, including me. This battle was nothing like the last. The orcs had been brutal, but simple. These traitor Astartes fought with a tactical mind that mirrored our own. They anticipated our doctrines because they had once practiced them. They countered our strategies because they had once conceived them. They knew our strengths and, worse, our weaknesses, because those had once been theirs as well. I found myself facing a chaos dreadnought, a towering mass of corroded iron and screaming demonic visages. Once, its pilot had been a space marine like me. Now, warp corruption had twisted him into something unrecognizable. Our weapons crashed together, sparks flying from plate and plating. Over the corrupted Vox systems, his voice crackled with malice. "Do you understand what you are now, loyalist?" he hissed. "A phantom locked in a coffin, a soul in fetters. You claim to serve the Emperor, but you are a slave to the engine that devoured you." I crushed his sarcophagus with my power fist, cutting off his blasphemy mid-sentence. But his words lingered long after his wrecked form stopped twitching. Was that my future? A thing more machine than man, held together by duty, habit, and fear of the void. I forced the thought aside and fought on, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep, and the soil of my mind was all too ready to nourish it. The war band was eventually driven back into the warp, but the cost was steep. Many of my brothers fell, their gene seed recovered for those yet to come. I attended their funeral rites, standing motionless as a titan of iron while flames consumed their bodies. Chapter Master Corvin spoke over the pyres, his words carrying the gravitas of centuries. "These brothers have found peace in the Emperor's embrace," he declared. "Their watch is over, their duty fulfilled. They rest now in halls of honor, beyond pain and sorrow." I envied them. I envied their release, their completion, the finality of their rest. They had died heroes, names carved into memory, deeds sung for generations. I would remain, imprisoned in steel, watching the slow erosion of everything I had once loved. After the rites, I was lowered back into the depths of the fortress monastery, into the vast sanctum where dreadnoughts waited between wars. The chamber was a cavern of shadows and humming machinery, lined with rows of sarcophagi in various states of activity. Some throbbed faintly with power, their occupants lost in whatever passed for dreams among the entombed. Others sat dark and cold, their long-suffering inhabitants finally granted the rest they had been denied for centuries. In the cradle beside mine hung brother Ancient Gareth. He had served encased in iron for over 400 years, and the chapter's leaders often sought his counsel in times of crisis. As my systems powered down, I heard his voice flicker through the internal Vox network that linked us all. "The first battles are always the hardest, young brother," he said, his metallic tone somehow still carrying a trace of warmth. "You still remember what it was to be flesh. That memory is both gift and burden. How do you endure it?" I asked. "The solitude, the unending waiting, by forgetting," Gareth answered. "Each time you wake, you will remember a little less of who you were. The human parts fade like mist at dawn, leaving only the warrior's purpose. It is the mercy the machine spirit offers to those who serve faithfully." His words should have soothed me. Instead, they filled me with a hollow dread. To forget who I had been was to erase what little remained of Olrich Veinar. Would I become nothing more than a sentient weapon, a gun that could think but no longer dream? That thought frightened me more than any enemy I had faced in life. Sleep claimed me again, this time for longer. When I next awoke, frost rimed the edges of my sarcophagus, and the recycled air tasted old and stale even to my augmented senses. The hall was darker, quieter. Many of the other dreadnoughts now stood cold and lifeless. I tried to hail Gareth across the Vox. Only static answered. "Brother Ancient Gareth is at rest," said a voice I did not know. Another dreadnought spoke, his sarcophagus decorated with honors I did not remember seeing before. "His vigil ended 37 years ago. I'm Brother Ancient Matthias. Welcome back to the land of the living, Brother Olrich." 37 years. I had been gone for 37 years. In that span, Gareth had finally been granted the peace he had so long been denied. Part of me was glad for him. A larger part felt icy fear coil around what remained of my heart. How many brothers had fallen while I slumbered? How much of the world I knew had shifted beyond recognition? "What have I missed?" I asked. "Much and very little," Matthias replied. "Wars fought, wars won. New brothers raised to fill the gaps. The Imperium endures as ever. The details, faces, dates, victories fade with time. Only the eternal truths remain. I had been awakened for yet another campaign. I no longer recall the identity of that foe or the name of the world on which we fought. Battles bled together in my mind. Orcs, Chaos Astartes, Eldar raiders, Imperial traitors, blurring into a single endless procession of targets to be eliminated. It ceased to matter who we fought. I was what they had made me, a weapon in the Emperor's arsenal, pointed wherever annihilation was required. With each awakening, changes became more obvious. The faces beneath the helmets around me were younger, less familiar. The rituals before battle had shifted in subtle ways, evidence of decades slipping past while I lay inert. Even the architecture of our ships and fortress had evolved, altered by generations of tech marines who knew me only as some ancient relic to be revered from afar. Worst of all were the changes within myself. Memories of my life in flesh began to fray. The faces of my old squad faded, their voices growing dim. The sound of my original voice became a faint echo, overshadowed by the harsh Vox grind I now used. Even my own name started to feel strange, like it belonged to someone I had once read about but never truly knew. During one period of wakefulness, I interfaced with the chapter archives to research my own history. The records were meticulous, kept by dutiful librarians across the centuries. There he was, Brother Captain Olrich Veinar, commander on a dozen battlefields, bearer of honors, slayer of foes beyond counting, a hero whose deeds had earned the privilege of entombment in living iron. Yet as I read, it felt as if I were studying a stranger. The memories still existed somewhere deep in the surviving folds of my brain tissue, but they refused to align with the being I had become. It was as though Olrich Veinar had truly died on Morak Prime, and something else had risen in his place, wearing his name like ill-fitting armor. It was during the siege of Vaelthara that I finally grasped the full horror of my existence. Vale was a shrine world, its surface crowded with cathedrals and monuments reaching skyward like a million stone prayers. The enemy was a chaos cult that had burrowed into the heart of the planetary government, twisting devotion into heresy until worship itself became a vector of corruption. I was brought out for this campaign because my tactical data stores were rich with experience in siege warfare and urban combat. The tech priests seemed almost eager, as though deploying me against heretics instead of Xenos somehow made the undertaking purer, more pious. As I was secured into a drop pod with a squad of tactical marines, I studied their faces through my optics. They were young, even by Astartes standards, their armor unscarred, the ceramite almost gleaming. One of them, a sergeant whose nameplate read Corvin, resembled someone from my past. I could not place who. "It is an honor to fight beside you, Ancient One," Sergeant Corvin said as the pod shuddered in preparation for launch. "My grandfather served with you in the Morton campaign." The Morton campaign. I searched my internal logs and found detailed tactical maps, casualty lists, supply tallies, but almost no human context. I remembered orcs, a long, grinding siege of a hive city. But the faces, the voices, the emotions of those days had washed away. "Your grandfather was a fine warrior," I said, though I could not recall his features, his voice, nor how he met his end. "He died with honor," Corvin replied. "He lived with honor, too. He always said watching you fight was like watching the Emperor's own wrath given form. More praise, more hollow words." I had heard such sentiments too often over too many campaigns, and they no longer stirred anything within me. I was what I was, a weapon wrapped in the legend of a man who had died a long time ago. The young warriors saw glory where I could feel only the imperative of my programming. The descent to Vale was brutal. Atmospheric storms battered the pod as it screamed toward the surface. On impact, the jolt was so fierce, one of the Marines was slammed against his restraints, hard enough to crack his helm. I remained entirely unaffected, my massive frame bolted in place, my armor more like a bastion than a suit. The city into which we deployed was a monument to faith turned rancid. Where majestic spires had once risen in the Emperor's name, now twisted sigils of the dark gods defaced the stone. The very air felt heavy and sour, thick with whispered blasphemies and warped devotion. Even through mechanical sensors, I could feel the wrongness saturating this place. And yet I felt no true rage. The shattered icons, the defiled altars, the mutilated statues, these should have ignited a blaze of righteous fury within me. Instead, I simply logged their presence, evaluating how each ruined structure enhanced the cult's defensive positions. Our first engagement came at the Cathedral of St. Marga, where cultists had barricaded themselves behind overturned pews and hastily assembled fortifications. They opened fire as we approached, last bolts sparking off our armor like angry insects. My assault cannon answered. The heavy shells shredded their cover, pulping flesh and splintering wood into a red mist and ragged debris. "Advance," I ordered, and the tactical Marines pushed forward with drilled precision, clearing chamber after chamber, their bolters barking death at any who stood against the Emperor's will. As I watched them fight, I found myself calculating acceptable casualty margins instead of fearing for their lives. Sergeant Corvin took a last round to the shoulder, right where his pauldron met his breastplate. It punched through the weak point and drew a steady flow of blood. By Astartes standards, the wound was minor, though painful. Once, the sight of a wounded brother would have stirred anger, protective instinct, maybe even a spark of dread at the thought of losing him. Now, I simply adjusted my mental projections to account for the slight drop in his combat efficiency. "Can you continue, Sergeant?" I asked. "I can, Ancient One," he answered, sealing the breach with emergency foam. "It will take more than heretic filth to halt a son of Kor, sons of Kor." The phrase echoed somewhere deep inside me, brushing against a fragment of pride I thought long dead. Some glimmer of belonging tried to surface, only to fade before I could grasp it. The campaign on Vale dragged on for months. We fought through tainted cities and desecrated sanctuaries, our armored boots grinding holy ground that had been sanctified by the prayers of pilgrims over millennia. With every clash, every hard-won victory, we drove the heretic forces back, step by bloody step, toward their final refuge in the great cathedral spire at the heart of the world. Yet as the war dragged on, I began to notice a change, not in our enemies, but in the Space Marines fighting at my side. Constant exposure to the filth of chaos, day after day of witnessing sacrilege and corruption, was eroding their spirits. After each engagement, they added more and more rites of purification, lingering for hours in prayer and meditation, desperate to scour away even the faintest hint of taint. I felt none of this burden. The symbols of the dark gods that drove my brothers to anger or despair appeared to me only as designations on a targeting grid, coordinates to be erased with flame and high explosive. The blasphemous chants that made veterans clutch at their helmets were, to me, nothing but irrelevant audio to be filtered out. I had become resistant to corruption not through saintly purity or unbreakable faith, but because there was simply not enough of the man left inside the machine for chaos to seduce. This truth struck me fully during the final assault on the cathedral spire. We breached the inner sanctum where the cult leaders had chosen to make their last stand. The chamber was a grotesque parody of holiness. Its walls crawled with sigils that seemed to shift and pulse in the unsteady light. At the center stood a figure that had once been human, but now its form was so hideously altered that even my hardened mechanical perception recoiled from it. The being that had once worn the title of planetary governor spoke in a voice like tearing metal and shattering glass. "Welcome, servants of the false emperor," it rasped. "Come and see the truth beyond the veil of your precious Imperium. See what your devotion has truly purchased." Sergeant Corvin lifted his bolter, but his hands shook so violently he could barely keep the weapon level. The other Marines were no better, faces pale, eyes wide, their faith struggling against the undeniable presence of corruption all around them. Only I remained unaffected. My targeting arrays calmly locked onto the abomination, tracking it with cold precision. "I see only another target to be destroyed," I replied, and opened fire. My assault cannon thundered, each shell punching through warped flesh and unnatural bone with brutal efficiency. It died as everything dies when enough force is applied, its blasphemy snuffed out in a hail of mass-reactive rounds. The Marines cheered, their spirits lifted by the tangible proof that evil could still be slain. Their faith renewed, at least for a time. I felt nothing. The campaign concluded with the planet's cleansing. Temples were reconsecrated. The population was subjected to inquisitorial scrutiny. Those judged untainted were permitted to live. Those marked by corruption were granted what the Imperium calls mercy, death by bolter or flame. It was another victory in an unending series of wars. Another world dragged back from the brink for a while. As I was being secured into the transport that would return me to my long sleep, Sergeant Corvin approached my sarcophagus with a kind of reverent stiffness in his posture. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that stirred a faint, unplaceable memory, a resemblance to someone I'd once known, though the specifics eluded me. "Ancient One," he said, "I wish to thank you for your service in this campaign. Your presence gave us strength when we might have faltered." I looked down at him through my lenses. He had fought bravely through months of horror and corruption, everything a space marine is supposed to be. Bold, devout, unquestioning. He would almost certainly die in some future war, his name added to honor rolls that fewer and fewer would read. "You fought well, Corvin," I told him. "The chapter is fortunate to count you among its sons." He smiled, simple, honest pride lighting his features. Once, that might have warmed my heart. Instead, I found myself wondering how long it would take before that smile was gone. Before battle and time reduced him to another statistic, another line in a casualty report. "Will you remember this campaign, Ancient One?" he asked. "Will you remember us?" The question struck deeper than any weapon. Would I remember? Even as he spoke, the details of the fighting were already beginning to smear together, sinking into the vast impersonal mass of tactical data that dominated my mind. Faces, conversations, specific moments of courage or fear. These would all, inevitably, be worn down into numbers and summaries unless I fought desperately to hold on to them. "I will remember," I said. It was a lie, a gentle one, perhaps, but a lie all the same. I knew that once I sank back into that artificial sleep and woke again centuries or days later, Corvin and his brothers would be reduced to names in the archives. Ghosts among a multitude of half-remembered campaigns. The decaying organic tissue that still passed for my brain, the only part capable of holding emotional context, was failing in increments. Year by year, fragment by fragment, it was surrendering to the machine. Sleep took me again. But this time, what came was not the familiar abyss. I dreamed. I found myself walking down corridors that felt like they belonged to our fortress monastery, but somehow wrong. The walls were lined with banners and honor scrolls I recognized, campaigns I had fought in, victories I had helped secure, but the names beneath those honors were of Marines I did not know. When I tried to focus on the inscriptions, the letters twisted and blurred, slipping away from comprehension. I walked on until I reached a chamber that I knew I should recognize, though no specific memory surfaced. At its center stood a figure in power armor, turned away from me, studying a tactical display. When he turned, I saw my own face, young, unscarred, human, looking back at me. "Hello, Olrich," he said, and the voice was mine as it had been before they tore out my ruined larynx and replaced it with Vox speakers. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew. "I am who you were," he replied. "The man who died on Morak Prime, the warrior they claim to have saved. I'm everything they cut away when they sealed you inside that coffin." I tried to answer, but the sound that emerged was the familiar mechanical rasp, discordant in this place of memory. "Why are you here?" "To remind you," he said, "to show you what they took from you when they granted you this endless half-life. Look at yourself, Olrich. Really look. For the first time in centuries, I saw myself from the outside. I was a hulking mass of metal and ceramite, a walking gun emplacement that only faintly resembled anything human. My limbs were weapon mounts and reinforced actuators. My torso was a sarcophagus of armor wrapped around the tiny, broken scrap of flesh that still housed my consciousness. I was not a man clad in armor. I was a machine carrying the echo of a man. "They told me I was honored," I said. "They told you many things," the other me replied. "That your service would continue, that your wisdom would guide those who came after, that your sacrifice would never be forgotten. But what did they fail to say?" I sifted through memories of my interment. The rites, the speeches, the solemn promises. "They never told me I would forget," I said at last. "They never told me that each time I woke, more of who I was would be gone. They never told me I would become a stranger to myself." The figure inclined his head, sorrow in his eyes. "They couldn't tell you," he answered. "They don't understand. To the tech priests, you're a preserved asset, a useful function maintained. To the chaplains, you're the embodiment of sacrifice made eternal. None of them truly grasp the cost." "What is the cost?" I asked, though I already felt the answer looming. "You," he said quietly. "Everything that made you Ulrich Venar. Everything that made you human. Everything that made you more than a thinking weapon. You're dying in pieces, dissolving like ink in water, until nothing remains but the machine and its routines." I wanted to deny it, to insist that somewhere inside all that steel, my soul was unchanged. But I couldn't. The pattern was undeniable. With each awakening, I was less a man and more a set of combat protocols inside a walking gun platform. One day, the dreadnought bearing my name would still function, still answer orders, still march to war, but there would be nothing left of me inside it. "How long?" I asked. "Not long now," he said. "Already you struggle to hold faces in your thoughts, to feel any bond with those around you, to experience anything beyond the cold satisfaction of a successful deployment. Soon, you'll be like the others in the deep vaults, ancient beyond counting, but hollow. The dream began to dissolve, the chamber and the figure fading to mist. Before he vanished completely, he spoke one last time. Remember this, Olrich. For as long as you can, remember what it meant to be human. I woke to the familiar sequence of sounds, power cells cycling up, hydraulics venting, the whisper of life support systems engaging. Tech priests moved around my sarcophagus, reciting litanies and checking readouts. The chaplain waited nearby, skull-faced helm gleaming under harsh lumen strips. Ancient One, he said, the chapter has great need of your counsel. A space hulk has translated into real space in the Hadrian system. Its mass threatens vital shipping lanes. Boarding actions are required, and your experience in void combat is deemed crucial. I responded in the proper, ritualized way, the phrases hard-coded into me by long habit and programming. But a part of my awareness clung to the remnants of the dream. The man I'd once been, the warning he had given, the slow erasure of everything that was me. Was it a mere misfiring of damaged neurons or something more? I did not know. The space hulk itself was a monstrous tangle of vessels welded together by the warp, drifting through the void like a malignant tumor. Sensors detected multiple life signs scattered throughout its structure, though what kind of life remained uncertain. Human survivors, Xenos parasites, or worse. The iron hammers would board in strength, purging it deck by deck until it was safe to claim or necessary to destroy. I was assigned to the primary assault team, my heavy frame and weaponry perfectly suited to holding choke points and breaking fortified positions in narrow corridors. As the boarding torpedo streaked toward the hulk, I studied the faces of the Marines sharing the cramped interior with me more intently than usual. There was Sergeant Matthias, a veteran of 3 centuries, his calm stoicism hiding a devotion as sharp as any blade. Next to him sat Brother Lucian, barely removed from the scout company, yet already showing the makings of a future leader. The others were no less worthy, each a flawless example of what it meant to bear the gene seed of our Primarch. They deserved to be remembered, but I knew I would not hold them in my thoughts for long. By the time I next awoke, from days, years, or decades of nothing, these faces would have slipped away, leaving only entries in mission logs and casualty tables. The realization stirred something I had not truly felt in a very long time. Grief. Grief for memories I had not yet lost. For bonds I would never be able to truly form. For the man who had once been Ulrich Venar and could never be again. The torpedo smashed through the hulk's outer hull, its melter charges burning through twisted layers of metal and corrupted armor. The impact reverberated through my frame, meaningless to my inertial dampeners. We deployed into a corridor that had once belonged to an Imperial cruiser. The walls were scarred by forgotten wars and warped further by centuries of exposure to the warp. The air was clotted with the stink of rot and something worse, something that made even my artificial senses flag warnings. "Contacts ahead," Matthias reported, his auspex painting faint figures in the darkness. "Multiple life signs. Readings are distorted." I sharpened my visual and targeting feeds, peering down the corridor. The machine spirits in my systems worked quickly, marking movement, tracing silhouettes, calculating fields of fire. I saw why the auspex had difficulty. The passageway was choked with shapes that had once been human. Warp corruption had remade them into grotesqueries that defied easy categorization. Some sported extra limbs that writhed like independent creatures. Some had faces melted into masks of eternal anguish or warped ecstasy. All moved with the shuffling, unsteady gait of things no longer fully in command of their own bodies. "Warp touched," I announced, my vox booming through the stale air. "Cleanse them with fire and steel. Grant them the Emperor's peace." The Marines advanced with ingrained discipline, bolters roaring as they pushed into the seething mass of corrupted humanity. I lumbered behind them, my assault cannon joining the chorus of destruction. The warp-touched died in droves, torn apart by explosive shells and ground under ceramite boots. Yet as I watched, I found myself studying their faces more closely. These had been loyal subjects of the Imperium once. Men and women who likely prayed to the Emperor for deliverance as their ship slipped into the hell of the warp. They had been twisted against their will, reshaped into monstrosities by forces beyond their comprehension. Once, the sight might have sparked pity or righteous anger at the powers that had mutilated them. Now, all I felt was a cold satisfaction that hostile entities were being efficiently neutralized. My mercy had been reduced to an equation. Termination was preferable to their continued existence as slaves of chaos. We drove deeper into the hulk, moving from gutted deck to gutted deck, exterminating warp-touched humans and even stranger creatures lurking in the dark. Some compartments held things that could barely be described. Entities composed of shadow and frozen screams, attacking with weapons forged from ideas rather than steel. Others contained fragments of the original crews, somehow still sane after centuries of torment, begging us in the same breath for salvation and death. During one skirmish, Brother Lucian was seized by a thing that looked like molten metal given malevolent will. It clung to his arm, its touch warping holy ceramite to black, spined corruption. Lucien screamed as the change spread, his pure flesh bubbling and warping beneath his armor. "Ancient One," he gasped, voice thick with pain and panic. "Please, I feel it changing me. I hear whispers, things no loyal son should hear. End this, before I shame the chapter." His plea hit me harder than any physical blow. Here was a young warrior, barely begun in the Emperor's service, asking for a mercy killing rather than risk becoming a vessel of corruption. Once, that choice would have torn at what remained of my soul. Now, all I saw was a contamination point that needed to be removed before it endangered the mission. The brutal logic was simple. Eliminate the compromised element. Prevent further spread. Secure the objective. I crushed the creature with my power fist and bathed the area in cleansing flame, but the taint had already sunk too deep into Lucien's flesh and spirit. I raised my fist again, its field humming with deadly energy. "Go to the Emperor, brother," I said. "Your watch is over." The strike was swift and absolute, ending his life before the pain could fully register. His gene seed was recovered for implantation in some future aspirant, his legacy preserved that in the only way the Imperium truly understands. I watched his blood spread across the warped deck plates, and I felt nothing. No sorrow for his lost potential, no anger at chaos for stealing another son of the Imperium, no ache of brotherhood severed. I had become exactly what they wanted, a weapon that could think but no longer truly feel. The operation dragged on for weeks as we purged the hulk section by section, while tech marines combed through its twisted innards to judge whether any portion was fit for reclamation. We faced enemies ranging from feral humans driven to cannibal madness, to things that only partially existed in real space. Beings of distilled hatred given borrowed form by warp energies. Through it all, I did what I had been built to do. Identified threats, calculated the most efficient responses, and executed them with relentless exactness. At the same time, I found my perspective shifting further. I no longer saw my battle brothers as comrades so much as examples of human behavior. I observed them as if from outside, like a scholar examining specimens. When Sergeant Matthias wept silently over civilians fused into living ornaments for some demon's amusement, I registered his emotional reaction as a potential vulnerability under certain conditions. When Chaplain Erasmus flew into a fury at blasphemies etched into the hulk's steel, I noted how his rage led to suboptimal tactical decisions compared to a colder, more calculated approach. I was becoming something that could dissect human responses, but could no longer share them. A mind that remembered, in an academic sense, what emotions had once felt like, but could no longer access them. The dream of my former self no longer felt like a glitch. It felt like a final warning. a last message from the dying ember of the man who had once been Olrich Venar. The campaign reached its climax when we finally forced our way into the Hulk's core, a colossal chamber that had once been the bridge of an ancient Imperial battleship. At the heart of the chamber waited a being that might once have been human, though the warp had reshaped it into something that was as much idea as flesh. It addressed us with a chorus of voices that seemed to come from every direction at once, promising power and revelation if only we would surrender our souls. My battle brothers recoiled, their faith shielding them from the worst of its insidious offers. I felt nothing. There was no temptation, no disgust, only the quiet awareness of a new target. The promises it made had no hold over me, because I no longer possessed the capacity to want anything beyond the successful completion of my assigned mission. I locked my targeting arrays and unleashed a sustained burst from my assault cannon. As its warped form tore apart, its final scream sounded disturbingly like laughter. "You are already ours," it hissed as its body unraveled. "Already hollow, already lost. We need only wait." In time, the Hulk was fully secured and divided for salvage. Useful components were stripped away. The corrupted sections were reduced to slag by purifying flame. The iron hammers had distinguished themselves once more, their banners bearing new honors, their casualty rolls light considering the foe they had faced. Yet as I was sealed back into my transport cradle for the return journey, my thoughts circled around the demon's last words. Was I truly already lost? Had the long, slow decay of my humanity progressed so far that nothing remained to save? I tried to conjure the faces of the Marines who had fought beside me throughout the campaign, Matthias, Lucian, Erasmus, but they were already slipping from my grasp, dissolving into impersonal data entries in my combat logs. Their valor, their faith, their quirks and voices, and small human details, everything that made them themselves, was being flattened into statistics and tactical summaries by the machine that my consciousness had become. Sleep claimed me again. But this time, the darkness was not empty. I stood in a vast hall, lined with sarcophagi. Each bore the markings and sigils of a dreadnought, their names and deeds carved proudly into the ancient metal. As I moved among them, whispers seeped from within the armored shells. "Remember us," the voices murmured. "Remember who we were before this. Remember that we were human once." I walked along the rows, reading names that stirred no memory in me now, but which had once belonged to legends. Brother Ancient Thaddeus, who was said to have held the gates of Kor alone against an entire orc warband. Brother Ancient Casimir, whose strategies had saved 3 whole sectors from the grip of chaos. Brother Ancient Mordian, who had walked in the company of Primarchs and spoken with heroes whose names echoed across history. Each of them now reduced to a trapped awareness entombed in metal, their humanity slowly bleeding away until all that remained was a weapon that dimly remembered being alive. "This is your future," said a familiar voice. I turned to see the same figure from my earlier dream, the man who claimed to be who I once was. But he looked more faded now, edges blurred, as though he too were being eroded by whatever force gnawed at the others. "How much time do I have?" I asked. "Not long," he replied. "Every time you wake, more of what you were is gone. Every battle moves you further from man and closer to machine. Soon, you'll be like them, a name on a sarcophagus, and nothing more. Is there no way to stop it?" He looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "There is one," he said. "But it demands that you remember what it is to be human. That you feel something beyond duty and protocol. That you choose." "Choose what?" "Choose to care," he answered simply. "Choose to feel, even when it hurts. Choose to remember, even when the memories bring pain. Choose to remain human, even though everything around you has tried to strip that from you." The hall began to fade, the dream unraveling around us. His final words echoed after me as I was pulled toward wakefulness. "The choice is yours, Ulrich. But choose soon, before there is nothing left in you that can choose at all." I woke to the blare of alarms, warning klaxons shrieking through the fortress monastery. My activation sequence was accelerated, tech marines working with frantic precision to bring my systems online, chaplains reciting shortened liturgies over my weapons and chassis. Something was terribly wrong. I was needed now. "Ancient One," came Chapter Master Corvin's voice, taut with strain. "Our homeworld stands under assault. A massive chaos fleet has entered the system, led by the traitor warband known as the Iron Skulls. Their goal is to seize our relics and corrupt our gene seed for their profane ends." I queried my databanks. Reports on the Iron Skulls surfaced, once loyal Astartes, now twisted by the very darkness they once opposed. At their head, a warlord called the Ravager, a former chapter master whose tactical brilliance had been turned to serve chaos. "What is my assignment?" I asked. "You will be deployed to the main courtyard," Corvin replied. "The central approach must not fall. Your firepower is vital to breaking their attack. The chapter's survival may rest on your service, Ancient One." As they moved me into position, I looked upon the fortress monastery with a clarity I had not known in centuries. This was my home. These walls had seen my rebirth as an Astartes. They had sheltered generations of iron hammers. Their halls had resonated with prayers, laughter, vows, and the footsteps of countless brothers, long dead and yet still present in the stones. For the first time in an age, something stirred deep within me, something that felt suspiciously like affection, perhaps even love. This place mattered. The warriors defending it mattered. The legacy they embodied mattered. The enemy came on like a tidal wave of blasphemy, chaos marines in black and crimson armor pushing through the wreckage of our outer lines. At their head strode a giant in Terminator plate. His very presence seemed to dim the light around him. His voice rolled across the battlefield like a physical blow. The Ravager. Even through the filters of my machine-augmented senses, I could feel the crushing weight of his gaze when it settled on me. "So," he boomed, his words amplified by Vox and warp-born power, "the famed ancient Olrich rises at last to defend his corpse-worshipping kin. Tell me, machine ghost, do you even remember what it was to be alive?" The taunt hit with unexpected weight, not because it wounded my pride, but because it dragged the memory of my dream back into sharp focus. The choice. Care or surrender. Humanity or convenience. I could default to cold calculation, treat this as another engagement to be optimized and executed. Or I could fight for something more. "I remember enough," I said. And for the first time in centuries, the words were not an empty formula. The battle that followed was unlike any I'd fought in my long existence as a dreadnought. For once, my actions were not purely the output of tactical algorithms and combat conditioning. Something deeper drove me, something close to passion. These were my brothers dying around me. This was my home under siege. These invaders represented everything I had ever sworn to oppose. I hurled myself into the fray, assault cannon roaring as I advanced toward the enemy lines. Bolter rounds rang from my hull, sparks and shrapnel flying, but I pressed on, each ponderous step bringing me closer to the heart of the chaos formation. For the first time in centuries, I was not just obeying orders. I was choosing to fight. The Ravager met me amidst the shattered remnants of a shrine dedicated to the chapter's honored dead. Corruption poured off him in palpable waves, warping the stone at his feet and making the air writhe. We clashed like titans, and as our weapons locked and our strength strained against one another, something long dormant inside me flickered back to life. I felt not the cold awareness of system readouts and ballistic trajectories, but something akin to the fierce vitality I had known as a flesh-and-blood warrior. Each hammering blow, each split-second decision, each desperate counterstrike carried the echo of the man I had once been. "You cannot prevail, corpse machine," the Ravager snarled as our weapons ground together. "You are already dead, already hollow. You fight for nothing but fading memories." "Perhaps," I answered, and in the depths of my consciousness, I almost smiled. "But those memories are enough." I shifted my stance with a move I had not used since long before my entombment. a maneuver born of instinct and experience rather than calculation. It caught him off guard. My power fist punched through a weakness in his armor, crushing the corrupted flesh beneath and ending his existence with the same grim mercy I had once granted Brother Lucian. With their leader slain, the iron skulls faltered. The iron hammers surged forward, driving them back toward their landing zones with bolt and blade, purging our home of their presence. When the last of the traitors had fled or fallen, the fortress monastery still stood. The chapter had survived. As I surveyed the aftermath, friend and enemy alike lying broken across the once sacred courtyard, I realized something had shifted inside me. The familiar detachment remained, but it no longer commanded all of me. Beside it, growing stronger, was something that remembered how to care. I looked upon the Marines who had fought at my side, young warriors bearing the gene seed of our forebears and the weight of our history. I saw them not as mobile weapons platforms or resource allocations, but as individuals. For the first time in centuries, I committed their names to the failing organic parts of my mind, not as data points, but as brothers. Brother Captain Tyne, who held the Eastern Wall with a valor worthy of the chapter's founders. Sergeant Maxime, whose quick thinking turned the tide when defeat seemed imminent. Chaplain Morai, whose sermons and prayers kept the defenders' faith burning even when all seemed lost. I swore I would remember them, not as part of a casualty table, but as men. And in that act of remembrance, I reclaimed something of myself. The years that followed brought fresh campaigns, new enemies, and endless bloodshed, as they always had. But my perspective had changed. My efficiency remained. My tactical insight still made me valuable to the chapter. Yet now, each deployment was accompanied by a conscious decision. I chose to fight for my brothers, for our home, for something beyond abstract duty. I took the time to learn the names of those who fought beside me. I made an effort to remember their faces between periods of stasis. When young officers sought the counsel of the honored ancients, I gave them more than strategic advice. I offered them hard-won understanding. And when warriors fell, their absence hurt. Not as a reduction in total available force, but as the loss of a specific, irreplaceable life. The other dreadnoughts noticed. Few comprehended it. During one rare period when several of us were awake, Brother Ancient Theron, who had once told me that forgetting was a mercy, voxed me. "You have changed, young brother," he said, a note of puzzlement in his ancient tones. "You are different." I remembered something I thought was gone, I answered. I remembered how to be human. "Humanity is a liability," Theron replied, repeating dogma centuries old. "It anchors us to concerns that no longer apply, to feelings without function. We should have moved beyond such things." "Have we truly moved beyond them?" I asked. "Or have we simply forgotten why we fight at all?" He gave no answer. The link fell silent. But I sensed my words had struck deep, lodging somewhere even he could not easily dismiss. On my next awakening, I was told that Brother Ancient Solomon, the eldest among us, had finally fallen silent. His life support systems had simply failed to maintain his consciousness after more than 1,000 years of service. The Tech Marines called it a malfunction. I did not believe that. Solomon had let himself go. He had chosen to release his grip on a life that had become only burden and pain. I envied him, even as I honored his passing. But I knew I was not yet ready to follow his example. There were still brothers to protect, still memories to make, still humanity I refused to surrender. The humanity I had reclaimed was fragile, held together by decaying neurons and sheer obstinacy. The machine tugged at me constantly, offering numb efficiency and the comfort of not caring. I fought it every time I woke. During the campaign against the Tyrannid splinter fleet designated Kraken's Spawn, I dragged a young assault marine from the jaws of a chitinous monstrosity. His name was Corvin. Something about him echoed a face from long ago, though the details danced forever out of reach. When he thanked me, I felt a strange warmth that I finally recognized as pride. Serve the chapter well, I told him, and the words carried real weight. I will, Ancient One, he said. I'll make you proud. Proud. Such a sentiment should have meant nothing to a walking gun platform. But I understood it. I was proud of him, proud of his courage and loyalty, proud to fight at his side. When that campaign ended and I was returned to my slumber, I carried that feeling with me into the dark. A small thing amid the grand brutality of the galaxy, but real, human, mine. I awoke for my last battle on a nameless world against an enemy I can no longer clearly recall. The details have blurred, the smoke, the thunder, the endless clash of arms, all fading like a dream at dawn. What I remember with perfect clarity is the moment my systems began to fail. Not my weapons or servos. They functioned as flawlessly as ever, but the organic remnants that housed my mind. I could feel them going dark, one by one, like lights winking out across a besieged hive city. Understanding came with crystalline certainty. I was dying. Not the false, temporary cessation of function that the Tech Marines could repair, but a true ending. The death of consciousness itself. After centuries of being denied that final mercy, it had finally come within reach. I could have fought it. The life-sustaining mechanisms built into my sarcophagus could have kept my broken body limping along for years, perhaps decades longer. But I knew what that would mean. Stripped of my failing organic mind, I would become exactly what Theron had once described. A thinking weapon with no capacity to feel, a machine wearing the hollowed-out husk of my name. I refused that fate. Instead, I chose to let go. Before the end, I recorded one last message in my sarcophagus's databanks. A final testament for whatever Tech Marine eventually examined my remains. In it, I tried to distill everything I'd learned in my long imprisonment. To those who come after, I said, my Vox output wavering as my mind dimmed. Remember that we are more than instruments in the Emperor's arsenal. We are the sons of men who chose a duty greater than themselves. Do not allow the machine to devour what makes you who you are. Choose to feel, even when feeling hurts. Choose to remember, even when memories are all you have left. Choose to be human, whatever shape that humanity must take. I finished the recording just as my awareness began its final descent. As the darkness closed in, I felt something I had not truly known since my days in flesh. Peace. The last sensation I recall is the muffled roar of battle continuing around my inert form. My brothers still fighting, still striving, even as their ancient fell silent. They would mourn me, I knew. My name would join the long rolls of honor, another stone placed in the monument of our chapter's sacrifice. But more than that, I hoped someone would find my message and grasp the truth I had tried to share about the cost of our supposed immortality and the value of the fragile humanity we traded away. Then everything went quiet. 3 days later, the sarcophagus of Brother Ancient Olrich the Eternal was recovered from the battlefield. Its mighty frame was intact, its weapon systems unfired since the last recorded engagement, its life support still operational. The Tech Marines could find no mechanical reason for its silence, no ruptured conduit, no damaged catalyst, no corrupted cogitator. The machine still functioned perfectly. Only its occupant was gone. It was Tech Marine Corin who uncovered the hidden file in the sarcophagus's memory core, a final message from a warrior whose service had spanned nearly 6 centuries. He read it alone, his augmetic eyes scanning words that spoke not of armaments and campaigns, but of humanity endured against impossible odds, of consciousness preserved through sheer stubborn will, of the terrible price paid by those denied the mercy of death. When he finished, Corin sat in silence for a long time. He had known Ancient Olrich as a living legend, a towering engine of destruction whose presence on the battlefield had inspired generations of iron hammers. The message revealed something far more profound. Not just a weapon, but a man who had clung to his humanity despite everything that had been done to erode it. Corin copied the file to his personal data slate, and locked it behind encryption protocols accessible only to the chapter's highest officers. He understood the danger contained within those words. It challenged the very foundation of the Dreadnought program, the assumption that entombment was the highest honor rather than a carefully veiled curse. But it also held a wisdom the future might desperately need, a warning about the true cost of the immortality they bestowed on their finest heroes. In the deep vaults of the monastery, the other dreadnoughts felt the absence where Olrich's constant low thrum of power had once been. Brother Ancient Theron, who had spent centuries urging others to forget their humanity, found himself recalling conversations with Olrich across the ages. The questions, the doubts, the quiet insistence that humanity mattered, that it must be defended even within a shell of iron. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Theron wondered if his old comrade had been right. The funeral rites for Ancient Olrich were as grand as his legend demanded. Chapter Master Corvin spoke of duty fulfilled and sacrifice honored, of a warrior who had served for nearly 600 years without faltering. Hymns echoed through the great hall as the assembled Marines honored their fallen ancient with all the pageantry the Imperium could muster. But in the quiet depths where the other dreadnoughts waited between wars, the new silence spoke of something else, of a burden finally set down, of a vigil finally concluded, of peace earned at last. For those who listened carefully, that silence carried more truth than any eulogy. The iron hammers continued their eternal labor in the Emperor's name, as they always had and always would. Recruits replaced the fallen. New wars rose from the dark. Fresh horrors crawled out of the void. The great engine of war ground on. Yet in the chapter's sealed archives, hidden from all but a trusted few, a single message waited. It spoke of the shadow that lay behind their greatest honors, of the price of being denied the end all mortals are meant to know, of the decision each thinking being must make between cold mechanical perfection and the flawed, painful beauty of being human. And somewhere beyond the veil of mortal existence, wherever warriors go when their duty is finally done, the spirit of a man named Olrich Venar rested, his watch complete, his humanity preserved. In the end, that was enough. The war would not end, heroes would still fall, worlds would still burn. But in one small corner of that unending conflict, a single soul had chosen to remain human despite everything that had been done to strip that humanity away. In choosing feeling over numbness, memory over oblivion, he had achieved something no weapon could match. He had stayed true to himself. Now, his sarcophagus stands empty in the halls of remembrance. Its guns are silent, its systems dark. But the message it once held endures, a testament to choice, to dignity, to the stubborn endurance of the soul. For those willing to hear it, that testament is both warning and inspiration. A reminder that we are more than the machinery we wear, more than the wars we fight, more than the roles we are forged to fill. We are the sum of the choices we make, the feelings we refuse to surrender, the humanity we protect, even in the darkest of times. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of hungry gods, that truth is rarer than any victory and more precious than any glory. It is hope,